Do you have piles of cardstock strips you're just not ready to part with yet? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. I recently did a video with the Spellbinders 2023 February card kit of the month. I made 16 cards with the card kit, and in the process I made a bunch of cardstock scraps that were in different size strips because I used the cardstock that was included in the kit. So I decided that I would share some ways that I intend to use the cardstock strips in hopes that they would give you guys some ideas, even if you weren't following along specifically with that tutorial. So the first thing to do is to simply lay down your strips to create a stripe pattern on a card for a card background. This works with pattern paper as well as with cardstock, so you can use whichever one you have more of. And I already forgot my own first tip is to, when you're going to place it, place as much over the side as possible so that when you cut it off, there's a chance that you can still use some of that over again. And then I'll place my next strip. These ones aren't particularly big, so I don't think I'm going to be able to pull them in and like fill in the bottom or anything, but it is something worth noting for someone who maybe did start with a bigger strip. So you'd want to maybe push that one a little bit more to one side or the other. And so here's a good example of it. Like taking that corner to the corner of the card, so as much as possible is hanging off. And then you're going to take a scissor to trim off them on the back. I've heard many people recommend a longer bladed scissor, like the Tim Holtz scissor. I find that it does a pretty good job. Generally, I was quite happy with how my smaller scissors did the job as well. I have a pair of EK Success Cutter Bee scissors that I like quite a bit, and there's also like a non-stick version of them. I think especially when you're cutting on the folded edge, it's important not to cut into your cardstock. And then I think this card is going to be perfect for certain sports fans, because like that feels like it's gotta be the color of a sports team, dark blue and yellow. It's just of the cardstocks, those two really looked good together. Next, let's step it up a little bit with a cross hatch design. So we're going to have the pieces of cardstock layered on top of each other on a diagonal pattern. And again, you could do that where you try to get as much of it off the edge. These pieces are just a little too short for that to be the most effective thing to do. And then we want to leave enough room that we can create the little squares of a crosshatch pattern. Make sure it extends off the edge so that when you trim it off, and I'm going to eyeball it, but you could certainly like line it up here with your grid mat and make sure that they are more similar in their distances apart. Then I kind of come in again here with the blue. That has a pretty big gap, but still not quite enough to be, or like extra, but still not quite enough to be useful. Okay, so here's where my personal challenge runs in, is that I don't have strips long enough to do a full crosshatch across the card, so I'm just going to do a partial coverage of that look. And I'm going to be careful because I have two strips of green, but not any other color. So I want to make these as close to a square as possible, the little gaps in between them. That's what kind of gives it that crosshatch look. And again, you can just pull it up on your grid mat to confirm that your spacing makes sense. And I probably should have another one over here, which probably means I need this blue one. Okay, so again, making that square. I'm gonna, as you can see, I have a lot that I'm gonna wind up cutting off on these to make it work, but that's okay because these were really kind of just scraps anyway. They weren't like, I didn't intentionally cut down a bunch of cardstock to make these, so having a bunch of waste is not a big deal. You might prefer to have your top layer be the one that's diagonal because that makes it a little bit more of a clear place to put a sentiment. Also, I do kind of need to finish this off with a bit of the blue. So luckily, that is why I made sure that I hung off the scraps as much as possible, because now I can come in again with that and fill in that extra space. But I do definitely recommend testing out any of your patterns before you just glue everything down. And then that'll give you an interesting sort of background. And then I have one more. Based on the scraps that I had, I also thought I could do a small amount of paper weaving because I had these really long strips and then enough, like these also very small but shorter strips that I could weave through it. So the first step was to create a pattern of the colors that I have. So I did the pink, blue, yellow, and I laid them down on my grid mat, and I want to make sure that they're kind of all lined up, and then I'm going to take a piece of mint tape from scrapbook.com, but painter's tape, anything gentle that won't rip your paper, and I'm going to tape those down as I do my paper weaving. And when you do paper weaving, you want to go under one, over the next, under one, over the next, under one, over the next, and then you can alternate it. You can push your strips such that they are like completely butted up against each other, but I did find that with cardstock being a thicker paper, that was a little bit hard to do. There was always a little bit of a gap. And because I don't have terribly many of these, I thought I could create a bigger and more interesting pattern by putting some space between them. So I did pink, blue, yellow again, and now I'm ready to weave a pink strip in and demonstrate that for you. So the yellow one above it, I went under the pink. That means now I need to go over the pink. I'm going to bring this strip to the bottom. I'm going to go over the pink, under the blue, over the yellow, and now under the second pink. We're just alternating, constantly kind of switching back and forth. And then it'll be over the blue and under the yellow. By having that taped down, I can kind of pull on things a little bit more without worrying about things coming loose. And over time, by adding these weaving strips, I'm going to get a more secure top, and I'll eventually be able to flip it over without everything sliding everywhere. Then we're going to need to go in with a yellow strip. This time we go under the pink, over the blue, under the yellow, over the pink, under the blue. I know saying the colors out loud, it's like if you're using different colors, it's not going to be helpful, but just remembering that over, under, and I just want to demonstrate it a few times because I think seeing it a few times can be helpful. I'm the kind of person who, like, you know, if you write down the instructions, I will eventually figure it out, but if you show me, I'm gonna go much faster. I also remember doing this paper weaving in Girl Scouts, or like, I don't know what you call them when you're like a young Girl Scout, like daisies and brownies. I don't know. When I was young in scouting groups, and it's fun to come back to some of those simple techniques that we sometimes overlook in all of the fancy supplies that we have. Okay, so when I have weaved all my pieces together, I can pull it off, and things are sort of loosely held together by this tape, but also just by the weaving in and of itself. And if you wanted a little bit more contrast with your weaving, then you would want to maybe use different colors for the vertical and horizontal shades or stripes. Okay, so and we'll turn it over, and I'm gonna apply a big piece of adhesive to it. You could use like adhesive sheets, or this is a roll of adhesive tape from Elizabeth Crafts. I like this as a way of kind of securing the whole background rather than running like roller adhesive over all of it, but you could certainly try that technique. I just think there's a greater chance of you accidentally shifting things around a bit more. When you trim up your weaved panel into a like rectangular type shape, then you might want to secure these little edges down with some glue. They are secured so they'll never fall off the card, but if you feel like that's going to catch on something or you don't like the look of them popping up a little bit, then you want to glue them down. I decided to finish off the cards only with contents from the Spellbinders kit because that's where these scraps came from and that's what I was working on at the time. But of course, there's many, many ways you could finish these off. I hope you enjoyed this look at some different ways to use paper strips or cardstock strip scraps specifically that you might have in your collection. If you like this video, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.